The desert sun hung low over Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as families gathered for the annual Veterans Day ceremony. Children waved miniature American flags, while retired soldiers stood at attention, medals gleaming on their chests. The smell of barbecue drifted across the parade grounds, mixing with the distinctive scent of military polish and fresh-cut grass. But among the thousands celebrating America's heroes, one woman stood apart. She leaned against the fence near the helicopter maintenance hangar, dark hair pulled back under a weathered baseball cap, eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses that seemed both too casual and too deliberate. Her faded jeans and leather jacket gave nothing away, but something about her posture, shoulders squared, weight balanced, spine straight without being rigid, caught the attention of anyone who'd spent time around career combat pilots. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Check out the woman by the hangar," muttered Lieutenant Aaron Briggs to his fellow officer as they stood near the ceremony stage. "She's been there for over an hour, hasn't moved, hasn't taken a single photo, hasn't talked to anyone." His companion, Captain Miles Thornton, glanced over and shrugged. "Probably just some aviation enthusiast. My cousin's like that, obsessed with helicopters but weird about crowds." But Briggs kept watching. There was something about the way this woman tracked the aircraft parked across the field, not like a hobbyist or even a military spouse waiting for their pilot to appear. She read the machines like she was calculating weapon systems, fuel loads, and tactical positioning. Her gaze never wavered from the row of Apache helicopters sitting silent and powerful in their designated area. 300 yards away in the VIP section, Colonel Vincent Lawson lowered his binoculars and frowned. 26 years in the Army had taught him to notice things that didn't fit patterns, and this woman was definitely off pattern. No veteran's credentials visible, no escort, no apparent reason to have access to this close proximity viewing area. Yet somehow she'd positioned herself exactly where someone with tactical knowledge would want to stand, with clear sight lines to both the Apaches and the main access road. "Colonel Sergeant Ramos," he called to his aide without taking his eyes off the woman, "run a quick background check on the brunette by the maintenance hangar. Something feels wrong." Sergeant Felicia Ramos looked up from her tablet. "Sir, do you think she's a threat?" Lawson's jaw tightened. "I think she doesn't belong here, and in my experience, that either means everything or nothing." Down on the tarmac, the ceremony preparations were reaching their final stages. A formation of Apache helicopters sat in perfect alignment, their sleek profiles and weapon systems drawing admiring looks from the crowd. These weren't just for show. These were combat aircraft that had seen action in the Middle East, their pilots among the most skilled in the Army's aviation corps. But the woman's attention wasn't on the ceremony preparations. She was watching one specific Apache at the end of the row. The aircraft sat slightly apart from the others, its hull bearing faded scars from combat that maintenance crews had smoothed but never quite erased. The tail number was barely visible. AH-7743. A maintenance technician named Corporal Jason Mercer happened to be walking past the fence line when he noticed her. Something about her stillness made him pause and follow her gaze toward that specific helicopter. He'd been working on Apaches for 7 years, had seen every type of aviation enthusiast imaginable, but this felt different. The way she stared at that particular aircraft wasn't admiration or curiosity. It wasn't even the professional interest of someone in the industry. It was the look of someone seeing something that had once belonged to them, something they'd lost. "Just remembering," she said simply, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years shouting over rotor wash and engine noise. "Remembering what?" Mercer asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a worn military patch that she held up briefly before tucking it away. In that brief moment, Mercer saw the distinctive crossed sabers and wings of an Apache pilot, but the unit designation was one he didn't recognize. Before he could ask anything else, the loudspeaker crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, in 30 minutes we'll be conducting a special flight demonstration featuring our AH-64 Apache helicopters. These combat-proven aircraft and their pilots represent the finest in Army aviation, continuing a proud tradition of service and sacrifice. The crowd cheered and shifted forward, phones and cameras raised in anticipation. The woman didn't move. She just kept staring at Apache AH-7743, and Mercer found himself wondering why watching her made his skin crawl with anticipation. Something was about to happen. He could feel it in the air, the same kind of tension that came before a storm. In the command tent, Sergeant Ramos returned to Colonel Lawson with her tablet, her expression troubled. "Sir, I can't find anything on her. No matches in our visitor database, no military ID in the system, no press credentials, no veteran registration. It's like she doesn't exist." Lawson felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. In his experience, people who didn't exist in military databases fell into two categories: deep cover intelligence operatives or ghosts who were supposed to stay buried. "Keep monitoring her," he ordered quietly, "and Sergeant, alert the military police to be ready, but do not approach unless I give direct authorization. Something tells me we're about to witness something significant." As the minutes ticked down to the flight demonstration, the woman finally moved, just slightly. Her right hand brushed against the hem of her jacket, and for the briefest moment, the worn pilot's patch became visible again. But there was something else. A small tattoo on her wrist that Mercer barely glimpsed. Numbers that looked like coordinates, and beneath them, a single word in script: Survivor. The Apache helicopters began their startup sequence, their turbine engines creating that distinctive rising whine that every soldier recognized. Even from a distance, the crowd could feel the vibration in their chests as the powerful machines came to life. The woman, whoever she was, stood perfectly still, but Mercer noticed her hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, from muscle memory. Her fingers moved almost imperceptibly, as if reaching for controls that weren't there, running through pre-flight checks she hadn't performed in years. Lieutenant Briggs had moved closer now, his instincts as a young officer telling him that something was definitely wrong. He keys his radio. "Colonel Lawson, I'm observing the subject. She's exhibiting behavior consistent with pilot training. The way she's watching those aircraft, sir, she's not just looking, she's evaluating." In the command tent, Lawson raised his binoculars again and focused on the woman's face. Even from this distance, even behind those sunglasses, he could see something in her expression that made his pulse quicken. This wasn't a threat. This was something else entirely. Something that would change everything they thought they knew. The lead Apache lifted off first, its rotors cutting through the air with mechanical precision. The pilot executed a perfect hover before transitioning to forward flight, the helicopter's nose dipping slightly as it gained speed. 3 more Apaches followed in formation, their movements coordinated with the kind of precision that came from countless hours of training. But as the formation passed overhead, something impossible happened. Apache AH-7743, the scarred helicopter at the end of the row, began its startup sequence without a pilot in the cockpit. The turbine spooled up, the rotors began to turn, and warning lights flashed across the maintenance panel as the aircraft's systems came online independently. Mercer stared in disbelief. "That's impossible! There's no one in that bird!" The woman removed her sunglasses for the first time, revealing eyes that were a striking shade of amber, eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. When she spoke, her voice carried across the tarmac with unexpected clarity. "AH-7743 remembers its pilot. The question is whether the Army remembers her, too." And with that, she began walking toward the helicopter that had just started itself. While across Fort Bragg, alarms began to sound, and Colonel Vincent Lawson realized he was about to meet a ghost. The chaos that erupted across Fort Bragg was instantaneous and organized in the way that only military emergency response could be. Sirens wailed from the command center as military police units mobilized toward the flight line. Maintenance crews scattered from the self-activating Apache, their training telling them to evacuate when aircraft systems behaved unpredictably. Veterans in the crowd looked at each other with confusion, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong with what was supposed to be a celebration. But the woman kept walking. Her stride was measured, purposeful, carrying the confidence of someone who had made this walk 1,000 times before. She moved past the hastily erected barriers like they didn't exist, past the security checkpoints that were scrambling to coordinate a response, directly toward the Apache that was now fully operational without a pilot at its controls. Corporal Mercer found himself following her at a distance, his radio squawking with orders he couldn't quite process. He'd seen a lot of strange things in 7 years of helicopter maintenance, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this. Colonel Lawson was sprinting toward the flight line now, his aide, Sergeant Ramos, struggling to keep pace while coordinating with multiple units through her headset. "All units, hold your positions," Lawson commanded into his radio. "Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage the civilian approaching the aircraft." Lieutenant Briggs's voice crackled back. "Sir, with respect, that's an unauthorized person approaching an active military aircraft. Protocol dictates I'm aware of protocol, Lieutenant, but something tells me if we try to stop her by force, we're going to regret it. Observe and report only." The woman reached Apache AH-7743 and placed her hand flat against its hull, just below the cockpit. The helicopter systems responded immediately, not with the kind of random electrical glitches that sometimes plagued older aircraft, but with purpose. The cockpit displays illuminated in sequence, running through what appeared to be a diagnostic check, the weapons systems armed and disarmed in a test pattern. The navigation computer began displaying coordinates that weren't in any current flight plan. Inside the command tent, a young specialist named Private First Class Hannah Price was monitoring the Apache's telemetry data when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. She turned to her supervising officer, voice shaking. "Captain, you need to see this. The aircraft's internal systems are accessing archived pilot profiles. These files are... Jesus, these are over 12 years old." Captain Thornton leaned over her shoulder, staring at the screen. "What do you mean, archived pilot profiles?" "Sir, it's like the helicopter is recognizing someone. The biometric scanners are reading someone's hand pressure, heat signature, even heart rate through the whole contact. And it's matching them against a pilot who was..." She trailed off, her face pale. "A pilot who was declared killed in action in 2013. The woman, still unidentified to most of the personnel watching, stepped back from the Apache and looked up at its cockpit. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but somehow carried across the tarmac. "Hello, old friend. Been a long time." As if in response, the Apache's rotors increased their RPMs slightly, creating a distinctive sound that made several of the older veterans in the crowd straighten up in recognition. That particular rotor pitch, the specific harmonic that came from thousands of hours of combat flight, was something you didn't forget if you'd served in aviation units. Colonel Lawson had reached the perimeter now, breathing hard. He was close enough to see the woman's face clearly for the first time, close enough to notice the small scars on her hands that came from years of handling aircraft controls, close enough to see the way she moved with the unconscious grace of someone who'd spent more time in the air than on the ground. "Ma'am," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady and authoritative, "I'm going to need you to step away from that aircraft and identify yourself." The woman turned to face him, and Colonel Lawson found himself looking into eyes that held more combat experience than half of his officer corps combined. "Colonel Vincent Lawson," she said, reading his rank insignia and name tape with a glance. 26 years of service, 3 combat deployments, Purple Heart recipient, and, according to your file, a man who values truth over convenience. Lawson felt a chill run down his spine. "You seem to know a lot about me. How about you return the favor?"
She smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "My name is Captain Naomi Caldwell, service number 4692 Charlie Delta 88. I was declared killed in action on September 7th, 2013, while flying combat operations in Afghanistan." She gestured toward the Apache behind her. "This was my helicopter, and according to its memory, I'm still its primary pilot." Sergeant Ramos had been frantically searching through databases on her tablet. Now she looked up at Lawson with an expression of pure shock. "Sir, there is a Captain Naomi Caldwell in her KIA records, Apache pilot, 4th Aviation Regiment, lost during a classified operation near the Pakistan border. Helicopter destroyed, no remains recovered. Status presumed dead, honors awarded posthumously. Lawson stared at the woman standing before him. Captain Caldwell was reported dead 12 years ago. I was, Naomi replied simply. But as you can see, reports of my death were strategically necessary at the time. Before Lawson could respond, the situation escalated. 3 black SUVs came screaming onto the flight line, their emergency lights flashing. They came to an abrupt halt 50 yards from the Apache, and armed personnel in civilian tactical gear emerged. These weren't military police. These were something else entirely. Contractors, probably, or worse, military intelligence operatives who didn't answer to base commanders. A woman in her 50s emerged from the lead vehicle, her expensive suit and calm demeanor marking her as someone with serious authority. She approached Colonel Lawson with the kind of confidence that came from knowing she could override just about anyone's orders. Colonel Lawson, I'm General Evelyn Whitmore, Defense Intelligence Agency. This situation is now under federal jurisdiction. I'm ordering you to detain that woman immediately. Lawson looked between the general and Naomi, his military instincts warring with something deeper, a sense that whatever was happening here was more important than following orders blindly. Ma'am, with respect, I'm going to need to see proper authorization before You'll see whatever authorization I decide to show you, Colonel. Whitmore cut him off coldly. That woman is a security risk of the highest magnitude. She has information that is classified beyond your clearance level. Now, either you follow my orders, or I'll have you relieved of command and arrested for obstruction. Naomi watched this exchange with a knowing expression. Still covering your tracks, General? Still trying to bury the truth 12 years later? Whitmer's face went rigid. Captain Caldwell, if that's who you claim to be, you were declared legally dead. You have no authority here, no rank, no standing. You're a civilian trespassing on a military installation. Am I? Naomi reached into her jacket and pulled out something that made several of the surrounding soldiers gasp. It was a military ID card, worn but unmistakable, showing her photo with a clearance level that most of them had never even heard of. Special Operations, Tier 1 classification, authorization code Delta Phoenix Rising. Ring any bells, General? Whitmore's expression flickered with something that might have been fear. That authorization was revoked. Was it? Naomi smiled because according to the Apache's secure communication systems that you apparently forgot existed, my authorization is still active, and it supersedes yours. She turned back to the helicopter and pulled herself up into the cockpit with practiced ease. The systems responded immediately, displays lighting up with information that hadn't been accessed in over a decade. Flight logs from missions that officially never happened. Communication transcripts from operations that weren't in any public database. Evidence of things that powerful people had spent 12 years trying to keep buried. Colonel Lawson made a decision that would either end his career or define it. All units stand down. Do not interfere with Captain Caldwell. General Whitmore rounded on him furiously. Colonel, you are making a career-ending mistake. Maybe. But something tells me that whatever Captain Caldwell is about to show us is more important than my career. In the Apache's cockpit, Naomi's hands moved across the controls with muscle memory of thousands of flight hours. The systems responded like it had been waiting for her return. Systems coming online in perfect sequence. Through the external speakers, her voice carried across the flight line. 12 years ago, I was sent on a mission that officially didn't exist. When I came back with evidence of things that powerful people wanted hidden, they decided the easiest solution was to make me disappear. She looked directly at General Whitmore. Today, the disappeared come back. And this time, the whole world is going to know the truth.
The Apache's turbines roared to full power as Naomi completed her pre-flight sequence with the kind of speed that came from muscle memory burned so deep it could never be forgotten. In the co-pilot seat, Major Simone Drake, who had been conducting routine maintenance checks when the helicopter activated, sat frozen in disbelief, watching a dead woman fly her aircraft. Captain Caldwell, Drake managed, her voice tight with confusion and awe. Ma'am, I need to understand what's happening. According to every record I've ever seen, you died in Afghanistan 12 years ago. Naomi's hands moved across the controls with fluid precision, the Apache responding to her touch like a living thing reuniting with its partner. Major, what you've been told and what actually happened are two very different things. In about 3 minutes, you're going to understand exactly why they wanted me to stay dead. She keyed the external radio frequency, broadcasting to the entire base. Fort Bragg Tower, this is Captain Naomi Caldwell, an Apache AH-7743. I'm declaring emergency authority under Special Operations Protocol Phoenix 7. I am departing this airspace with critical intelligence that concerns national security. The tower's response was immediate and panicked. Apache 7743, you are not authorized for flight. Return to the flight line immediately or we will be forced to scramble interceptors. Naomi's laugh was bitter. Tower? I've been flying combat missions since before your controller was born. And unless some things change dramatically, you don't have anything fast enough to catch an Apache piloted by someone who knows every trick in the book. She pulled collective and the Apache lifted smoothly into the air. On the ground, General Whitmore was screaming orders into her secure phone, her carefully maintained composure cracking. Get me NORAD. Get me every available military asset. That helicopter cannot be allowed to reach its destination. Colonel Lawson stood watching the Apache climb into the afternoon sky, and despite the chaos erupting around him, he felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever was about to happen had been set in motion 12 years ago, and today was simply the day of reckoning. Sergeant Ramos approached him cautiously. Sir, I've been digging deeper into Captain Caldwell's service record. What I'm finding doesn't match the official KIA report. What do you mean? Lawson asked, without taking his eyes off the departing helicopter. Sir, according to the classified files I'm accessing, and I'm honestly not sure I have proper clearance for these, Captain Caldwell was one of the most decorated Apache pilots in the Army. She flew missions that the official record says never happened. And 3 months before her supposed death, she filed a report through proper channels about witnessing something during a combat operation.
Because we are in a combat zone, Major, Naomi replied, banking hard around a water tower. The enemy just wears nicer suits and works in air-conditioned offices. We're heading to a location that officially doesn't exist, a storage facility where evidence of illegal arms trafficking has been kept hidden for over a decade. Drake's eyes widened. You mean the weapons trafficking that was all over the news 3 years ago? The congressional investigation that went nowhere because there wasn't enough evidence? There was plenty of evidence, Major. It was just classified and buried by people who were implicated in the trafficking. People like General Whitmore, who at the time was a colonel running logistics for special operations. She was the one who signed off on equipment transfers that ended up in enemy hands. Naomi's voice was hard, carrying 12 years of suppressed anger. I saw American missiles being fired at American soldiers, Major. I watched men I'd trained with die because someone decided profit was more important than loyalty. And when I reported it, when I gathered evidence and followed every proper channel, they tried to kill me for it. The Apache's threat warning system suddenly lit up. Major Drake's training kicked in immediately. We've got a lock. SAM radar, bearing 270. They're actually targeting us with surface-to-air missiles? They're desperate, Naomi said calmly, executing an evasive maneuver that pushed the helicopter systems to their limits. The engine screamed as she pulled maximum power, the helicopter responding with the kind of performance that only came from thousands of hours of combat experience meeting cutting-edge military hardware. Behind them, 2 F-16 fighters were being scrambled from the nearest Air Force base. Their pilots received orders that made them exchange uncomfortable glances in their cockpits. Pursue and force down Apache helicopter call sign 7743. Pilot is considered hostile. Use of deadly force is authorized if necessary. But Naomi had anticipated this. She keyed a different radio frequency, one that was supposed to be reserved for the most classified military communications. This is Captain Naomi Caldwell, broadcasting on Emergency Authentication Network 7, authorization code Phoenix Delta 77 Charlie. I am declaring that I am being targeted by compromised military assets, acting under orders from personnel involved in illegal arms trafficking and treason. The frequency crackled with confused responses from various command centers, but in one location, a secure facility at the Pentagon where the most sensitive communications were monitored, a recording system activated. Everything Naomi was saying was now being logged at the highest levels of military oversight. To anyone listening, Naomi continued, her voice steady despite the high-speed maneuvering, I am Captain Naomi Caldwell. I was declared KIA 12 years ago after discovering evidence of illegal arms sales that implicated senior military and intelligence personnel. I survived the assassination attempt disguised as friendly fire. I've spent 12 years gathering evidence. Today, I'm bringing that evidence into the light. General Whitmore, monitoring the situation from Fort Bragg, felt her world beginning to collapse. The emergency frequency Naomi was using couldn't be jammed or shut down. It was specifically designed to prevent command structure corruption from silencing legitimate emergency communications. Every word was being recorded. Every claim was being logged. She grabbed her secure phone and made a call to someone whose name appeared in no official directory. "We have a containment failure. Caldwell is broadcasting on protected channels. She's heading toward the evidence cache." The voice on the other end was cold. "Then make sure she never reaches it. Use whatever force is necessary. If she exposes that cache, we all go down." Whitmore looked up at the sky where the Apache had disappeared into the distance and made a decision that would either save her career or end it in prison. "Authorization confirmed," she said quietly. "Weapons free."
The two F-16 pilots, call signs Viper 1 and Viper 2, caught sight of the Apache as it emerged from the canyon system. Both were experienced combat pilots, but neither had ever been given orders to fire on an American military helicopter flown by an American pilot on American soil. "Viper Flight, this is Overwatch." The AWACS controller's voice crackled through their headsets. "You are authorized to engage target with all necessary force. Repeat. Weapons free on Apache 7743. Viper 1, a major with 15 years of experience, felt his stomach turn. "Overwatch, requesting confirmation. You want us to shoot down an Army helicopter over North Carolina?" "Affirmative, Viper 1. Target is hostile. Pilot is compromised. National security priority." But something in the controller's voice didn't sound right. There was hesitation, uncertainty. The kind of tone that came when orders were being relayed from sources that maybe shouldn't have the authority to give them. Viper 1 made a decision. "Viper 2, stay on my wing, but hold fire until I give explicit authorization. Something about this doesn't smell right." In the Apache, Naomi's threat warning system was screaming. The F-16s had achieved radar lock and were in firing position. Major Drake was frantically working the countermeasure systems, her training warring with the surreal reality of being targeted by her own Air Force. "Captain, they have tone. They're going to fire." Naomi's response was to do something that shouldn't have been possible in an Apache. She executed a maneuver called a split S, rolling the helicopter inverted and diving toward the ground before pulling up hard. The G-forces slammed both pilots into their seats, and Drake heard herself make a sound between a gasp and a prayer. "How did you— That's not in the flight manual." "The flight manual," Naomi grunted, fighting the controls as the Apache shuddered under the strain, "doesn't know everything this bird can do when properly motivated." She keyed the radio again, this time broadcasting on the standard military frequency that the F-16 pilots would hear. "Viper Flight, this is Captain Naomi Caldwell. Before you fire on an American combat veteran, you might want to ask yourself who gave that order and why." Viper 1 hesitated, his finger on the trigger. "Apache 7743, you are ordered to land immediately. Any deviation will be met with force." "Major," Naomi's voice was calm despite the circumstances, "my name is Captain Naomi Caldwell, service number 4692 Charlie Delta 88. I was declared KIA in Afghanistan in 2013. I'm currently carrying evidence of illegal arms trafficking by senior military personnel. The people ordering you to shoot me down are the same people who tried to kill me 12 years ago." There was a long pause. Then Viper 1's voice came back, different now, more human. "Say again your service number?" Naomi repeated it, then added, "You can verify my identity through the defense personnel records. I exist, Major. The question is whether you're going to help cover up my murder or help me expose the truth." In the AWACS aircraft coordinating the intercept, the controller was frantically checking databases. What he found made his blood run cold. Captain Naomi Caldwell did exist in the records. Her service file was heavily classified, but what he could see showed a decorated combat pilot with multiple Valor Awards. And her death report had inconsistencies, the kind that suggested it had been hastily constructed rather than properly documented. "Sir," the controller said to his commanding officer, "we may have a problem."
This pilot's records don't match what we were told. Meanwhile, at Fort Bragg, Colonel Lawson had made his way to the command center where Sergeant Ramos was pulling up every file she could access on Operation Desert Thunder, the classified mission during which Naomi Caldwell had supposedly died.
"Colonel, you need to see this," Ramos said, her voice tight. "I found the original mission report before it was sanitized. Captain Caldwell was flying escort for a supply convoy when she reported seeing American weapons systems being offloaded to unknown individuals in a supposedly friendly zone." Lawson read over her shoulder, his jaw clenching with each line. She requested permission to investigate. Request denied. She followed the convoy anyway and documented American Javelin missiles, night vision equipment, and encrypted communications gear being transferred to individuals who were later identified as insurgent contacts. "It gets worse, sir," Ramos continued, scrolling through the document. She reported her findings through proper channels. 3 days later, she was assigned to a routine patrol in an area that was subsequently hit by what the report called enemy fire. But the ballistic analysis, the one that was supposed to be destroyed, shows the rounds came from an M2 Browning, an American weapon. Lawson felt rage building in his chest. "They shot down one of our own pilots to cover up arms trafficking?" "It looks that way, sir." "And the officer who signed off on that patrol assignment?" Ramos pulled up a personnel file. "Colonel Evelyn Whitmore, now a general." Back in the sky, Viper 1 had made his decision. "Overwatch, Viper 1, I'm not engaging that target without proper verification of threat status, requesting direct communication with command authority." The AWACS controller's voice came back, and now there was relief in it. "Copy that, Viper 1, stand by." But the delay had given Naomi the time she needed. The Apache dove into another canyon system, this one leading toward her ultimate destination, an abandoned military storage facility that officially didn't exist. "Major Drake," Naomi said to her co-pilot, "in about 2 minutes, you're going to see something that will fundamentally change how you understand military operations. I need you to document everything. Your testimony as an active-duty officer will be crucial." Drake nodded, still processing everything. "Captain, if what you're saying is true, if senior officers really did try to kill you, why didn't you come forward sooner?" Naomi's expression was grim. "Because I needed to stay dead long enough to gather irrefutable evidence. Coming back too soon would have just gotten me killed for real. I needed 12 years to build a case that even the most corrupt officials couldn't bury." The Apache emerged from the canyon into a flat desert area that looked completely empty. But as they approached, Naomi input a code in the navigation system, and suddenly ground-penetrating radar revealed a massive underground structure. "Welcome to Site 17, Naomi said quietly. "The place where inconvenient evidence goes to be forgotten." She bat the Apache into a hover over what looked like empty sand. Then, as she transmitted a specific frequency, sections of the ground began to slide away, revealing a landing pad that could accommodate multiple helicopters. "Dear God, how many facilities like this are there?" "More than you'd want to know, Major. This one was supposed to be decommissioned in 2009, but some people found it useful for storing things they didn't want found." As the Apache descended into the underground facility, automated lights flickered on, illuminating a space filled with equipment, files, and evidence that had been hidden for over a decade. Naomi set the helicopter down with practiced precision and began shutting down the systems. "Now comes the hard part, Major. Now we expose everything." The underground facility hummed with the sound of backup generators kicking to life after years of dormancy. Dust motes danced in the harsh LED lighting as Naomi and Major Drake climbed out of the Apache, their boots echoing on the concrete floor. The space was enormous, easily the size of several football fields, and filled with row upon row of storage containers, filing cabinets, and computer servers that had been left in a state of suspended animation. "This place is massive," Drake whispered, her voice carrying an appropriate reverence for what they were witnessing. "How did you even know it existed?" Naomi walked toward a control panel on the far wall, her fingers moving across the dusty keyboard with the confidence of someone who had been here before. "After they tried to kill me, I spent 2 years in hiding, recovering from injuries that officially never happened. During that time, I had a lot of motivation to dig into places I wasn't supposed to look. I found references to Site 17 in classified budgets, money being allocated to a facility that supposedly didn't exist anymore. The main computer system flickered to life, screens illuminating with data that had been frozen in time since 2013. I made it here once before, right after I had died. Downloaded everything I could, then spent the next decade verifying it, cross-referencing it, building a case that couldn't be dismissed as conspiracy theory or falsified evidence. Drake was examining one of the nearby containers, reading labels that made her stomach turn. "Captain, these are marked as destroyed equipment. Man pads, javelin systems, encrypted radios. This is stuff that's supposed to be demilitarized under strict protocols." "Supposed to be," Naomi agreed, pulling up file after file on the computer system. Instead, it was logged as destroyed, brought here, and then quietly transferred to buyers who didn't care much about American laws or American lives. She opened a specific directory, and suddenly the screens filled with documents, photographs, and video footage. "This is everything, Major. 12 years of illegal arms sales. Names, dates, wire transfers, shipping manifests, personnel records showing who authorized the transfers and who profited from them." Drake was leaning closer, her eyes widening as she recognized names. "That's Senator Morrison and General Whitmore, like you said. But there are others here too. Contractors, CIA personnel, even State Department officials." "The conspiracy went deeper than anyone wanted to admit," Naomi said quietly. "It wasn't just one corrupt officer or one bad deal. It was a systematic operation that used classified military operations as cover for arms trafficking. They took weapons that American taxpayers funded, marked them as destroyed, and sold them to the highest bidder." She pulled up a specific video file, and Drake watched in horror as footage showed American missiles being loaded onto trucks driven by individuals who were clearly not American military personnel. "This footage was taken by my Apache's targeting system during the mission where I was supposed to die. I was flying escort when I saw the transfer happening. I documented it, thinking I was doing my duty. Turned out, documenting crimes by your superiors is a good way to get killed." Drake's hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. "We need to contact—" "No phones," Naomi cut her off sharply. "The moment you turn that on, they'll triangulate our position. We're safe here because this facility is shielded and off the grid. But the second we go active with modern communications, we're compromised."
Instead, Naomi activated an older system, a satellite uplink that had been installed when the facility was operational. This is a military emergency broadcast system. It's designed to be impossible to jam or shut down. Once I activate it, everything in this facility's database will be transmitted to multiple secure locations simultaneously: Pentagon oversight, congressional intelligence committees, military justice division, and several major news organizations. Her finger hovered over the activation key. "Once I do this, there's no going back. Lives will be ruined. Careers will end. People will go to prison." Drake looked at her steadily. "People who committed treason and tried to murder a fellow soldier. People who sold weapons that killed Americans. Push the button, Captain." Naomi pushed the button. Above ground, in command centers and newsrooms across the country, systems began receiving massive data dumps from a source that identified itself as Site 17. Classified documents began flooding into servers, each one properly authenticated with military encryption that proved they weren't fabrications. In the Pentagon, a duty officer stared at his screen in disbelief as gigabytes of evidence materialized in the secure oversight database. He immediately called his superior. "Sir, we're receiving what appears to be classified documentation of illegal arms transfers spanning 12 years. The authentication codes are valid. This is real." At Fort Bragg, Colonel Lawson's computer pinged with an incoming secure transmission. As he opened the files, his face went pale. "Sergeant Ramos, get me a direct line to the Pentagon Inspector General. Now." At CNN's headquarters in Atlanta, an investigative journalist named Sarah Chen was working late when her secure Dropbox received an anonymous upload.
The documentation was so extensive and so detailed that she immediately called her editor. "You need to see this. Someone just sent us evidence of the biggest military corruption scandal since Vietnam." General Whitmore was in a secure facility when every screen around her suddenly lit up with alerts. Her face went ashen as she realized what was happening. The evidence she'd spent 12 years trying to keep buried was now spreading across every secure government network and into the hands of journalists who would make it public. She grabbed her phone and made one final call. "It's done." Caldwell activated the cache. "Everything is compromised." The voice on the other end was resigned. "Then we're out of options. Start burning documentation on your end. I'll handle Washington." But it was already too late. In the underground facility, Naomi watched on the monitors as confirmation signals came back from dozens of recipients. The data was out. Multiple copies existed now in locations that couldn't all be compromised or destroyed. "It's done," she said quietly to Major Drake. "Now we wait for the world to catch up." Drake was staring at one particular document on the screen, a casualty report from an operation in 2012, where American soldiers had been killed by weapons that, according to the data, had been sold through the very trafficking network they were now exposing. These soldiers died because of American weapons that were sold illegally, she said, her voice breaking. Their families were told they died in combat, but really, they died because of treason. Naomi placed a hand on her shoulder. Now their families will know the truth. Now everyone will know. The facility's alert system suddenly activated, warning lights flashing red. Naomi checked the security monitors and saw what she'd been expecting, a convoy of vehicles approaching the facility's concealed entrance. They'd been found. "Major, things are about to get interesting. General Whitmore isn't the type to go down without a fight. She's going to try one last time to silence us before the evidence becomes too public to suppress." Drake followed her to the helicopter, checking the weapon systems. "Then we'd better be ready to fight back." As they climbed into the Apache and began the startup sequence, Naomi allowed herself a grim smile. "Major, I've been ready for this fight for 12 years. Today, it finally ends."
The Apache systems came online with familiar precision. But this time the startup felt different to Naomi. This wasn't just another flight. This was the final mission, the one that would either vindicate 12 years of hiding or end in her actual death. Through the facility's security monitors, she could see the convoy had stopped at the concealed entrance, and armed personnel were deploying with military efficiency. "Captain, I count at least 20 hostiles," Major Drake reported, studying the tactical display. "They're equipped with anti-aircraft weapons, Stingers, maybe RPGs. They're not planning to let us leave." Naomi's hands moved across the controls, the Apache's weapon systems coming online. They're contractors, probably hired by Whitmore through back channels, deniable assets who won't ask questions about shooting down an American helicopter. She keyed the external communication system, her voice broadcasting through the facility speakers and to the forces outside. "To the personnel attempting to breach Site 17, I am Captain Naomi Caldwell, United States Army. The evidence you were sent to suppress has already been transmitted to multiple secure locations. Attacking us now will only add to the charges against your employers." There was a brief pause, then a voice responded over an open channel. "Captain Caldwell, this is Commander Hayes of Black Ridge Security. We have orders to secure this facility and prevent any unauthorized departures. Stand down and surrender, and you'll be treated fairly." Naomi laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Commander, I was treated fairly 12 years ago when they tried to kill me the first time. I think I'll pass on your generous offer." She turned to Drake. "Major, I need you to understand something. When we take off, they will fire on us. The people who hired them are desperate enough to risk everything to keep us quiet. If you want to stay here and surrender, I won't think less of you." Drake checked her weapon systems and looked at Naomi with steady resolve. "Captain, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Right now, the enemies are domestic, and I'm not abandoning my post." Naomi felt a surge of pride and gratitude.
Then let's give them something to remember us by. Activate countermeasures and prepare for immediate combat departure. The roof sections began to slide open, revealing the darkening sky above. It was late afternoon now, the sun casting long shadows across the desert. Perfect flying conditions if you ignored the people trying to kill you. The contractors outside the roof opening and immediately raised their weapons. Commander Hayes gave the order, light them up the moment they're airborne. But Naomi had spent 12 years preparing for this moment. She'd studied the facility's defensive systems, memorized every possible exit strategy, and most importantly, she'd learned patience. As the Apache lifted off, she didn't climb straight up as they expected. Instead, she used the facility's infrastructure, rising just high enough to clear the opening before diving forward, using the concrete structures as cover. The first wave of missiles streaked past, missing by meters, as Naomi's combat-honed reflexes put the helicopter exactly where the weapons weren't.
"Flares!" she shouted, and Drake deployed countermeasures that bloomed in the air like deadly flowers, drawing heat-seeking missiles away from the Apache's engines. The helicopter's 30mm chain gun came alive, Naomi laying down suppression fire that forced the contractors to scatter for cover. She wasn't trying to kill them. They were mercenaries following orders, not the real enemy. But she needed to break their coordination, create chaos, buy time to escape the kill zone. "We've got more inbound," Drake called out, checking her displays. "2 helicopters, military spec. They're not showing friendly IFF. Naomi banked hard, putting a rock formation between her Apache and the incoming threats. Whitmore must have called in favors. Those are probably borrowed from a National Guard unit. Pilots told we're terrorists or stolen aircraft. Through her headset, she heard radio chatter as the pursuing helicopters coordinated their attack. They were professional, experienced, and following doctrine perfectly, which meant Naomi knew exactly what they'd do next. "Major, when I give the signal, I need you to activate our emergency transponder. Broadcast on all military frequencies that we are American military personnel under attack by corrupted forces. Make it loud, make it impossible to ignore." She maneuvered through the canyon system with the kind of precision that came from thousands of combat hours, using terrain masking to break radar locks and force the pursuing helicopters to fly visually. "Now, Major!" Drake activated the transponder, and suddenly every military receiver within 200 miles lit up with an emergency beacon. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Army Apache 7743, Captain Naomi Caldwell and Major Simone Drake, under fire from hostile forces. We are American military. Repeat, American military under attack." The pursuing helicopter pilots heard the broadcast and hesitated. This wasn't what they'd been told. They'd been briefed that they were intercepting a stolen aircraft flown by domestic terrorists. Now they were hearing American military personnel calling for help. "Viper flight, Ghost flight, any military aircraft in range. We are under attack by forces attempting to prevent exposure of classified evidence regarding illegal arms trafficking. Request immediate assistance." One of the pursuing helicopter pilots, a National Guard captain named Robert Chen, made a split-second decision. "Ghost 2, break off pursuit. Something's wrong here." His wingman responded immediately. "Copy, Ghost 1, breaking off." On the ground at Fort Bragg, Colonel Lawson heard the emergency broadcast and felt everything click into place. He grabbed his radio. "This is Colonel Lawson, Fort Bragg Command. I am declaring a security emergency. All military assets. Be advised that Captain Naomi Caldwell is a legitimate American officer operating under duress. Any units engaging her are to cease fire immediately and identify their command authority." General Whitmore, monitoring from her temporary command post, realized her last gambit had failed. The emergency broadcast had changed everything. Too many legitimate military personnel were now aware of the situation. Continuing the attack would only provide more evidence of the conspiracy. She picked up her phone one last time, but before she could make the call, 2 FBI agents entered her office. "General Evelyn Whitmore, you are under arrest for conspiracy, illegal arms trafficking, attempted murder of a federal officer, and treason." In the Apache, Naomi saw the pursuing helicopters breaking off on her tactical display. She'd won. Not through superior firepower or luck, but through the simple act of telling the truth loud enough that people had to listen. "Major Drake, set course for Washington, D.C. We have an appointment with a congressional committee, and I think they're going to want to hear our story in person."
As the Apache turned east, flying into the sunset, Naomi felt something she hadn't felt in 12 years. Hope.
The flight to Washington, D.C. took 4 hours, with Naomi stopping twice at military bases for refueling. Each stop was surreal. Ground crews who had heard the emergency broadcasts and seen the news alerts treating her with a mixture of awe and confusion. A dead pilot resurrected. A conspiracy exposed. History happening in real time. At Andrews Air Force Base, just outside D.C., they were met by a full honor guard. Not the kind that arrests people, but the kind that welcomes heroes. Colonel Lawson had flown ahead and was waiting on the tarmac as the Apache touched down. As Naomi and Major Drake climbed out of the helicopter, Lawson approached and rendered a sharp salute. "Captain Caldwell, welcome back from the dead." Naomi returned the salute, feeling the weight of 12 years lifting from her shoulders. "Colonel, I appreciate the reception, but I'm here to testify, not to celebrate." "You'll do both," Lawson replied. "The Senate Armed Services Committee has convened an emergency session. They want to hear from you tonight." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "Captain, you should know. The evidence you transmitted has already resulted in 15 arrests. General Whitmore is in federal custody. 3 senators have resigned, and the Justice Department has opened investigations into over 40 individuals." Major Drake, standing beside Naomi, shook her head in disbelief. 15 arrests in 4 hours? How is that possible? "Because the evidence was irrefutable," Lawson explained. "Bank records, video footage, authenticated military documents, everything properly encrypted and verified. There was no way to deny it, no way to claim it was fabricated. The Inspector General's office had been investigating parts of this for years, but couldn't get the evidence they needed. You just handed them a complete case on a silver platter." A black SUV pulled up, and a woman in a business suit emerged. She approached with the confident stride of someone used to authority. "Captain Caldwell, I'm Assistant Attorney General Victoria Martinez. I've been assigned to coordinate the investigation into the arms trafficking conspiracy you've exposed." Naomi studied her carefully. "And how do I know you're not part of the same network that tried to kill me?" Martinez smiled without humor. "Because I've spent the last 3 years trying to build cases against these people with incomplete evidence. What you released today is everything I've been searching for. You just made my career and probably saved countless lives." She gestured toward the SUV. "We have a lot to discuss before your testimony. The committee wants details, context, and most importantly, they want to understand how this operation stayed hidden for so long." The drive to Capitol Hill was brief but intense. Martinez briefed them on what had happened in the hours since the data dump. "The media has gone into overdrive. Your story is leading every news network. Dead pilot returns to expose military corruption. It's the kind of headline that stops the world." She pulled up a tablet showing news coverage from CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and international outlets. All of them were running the same story, showing Naomi's military photo from 12 years ago next to footage of the Apache landing at Fort Bragg. Public opinion is overwhelmingly on your side. Veterans groups are demanding accountability. Military families whose loved ones died in operations involving the trafficked weapons are coming forward. This is bigger than Watergate, Captain. This is a fundamental reckoning with how our military-industrial complex operates. Naomi stared out the window at the monuments passing by. "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to stop people from dying because of American weapons sold for profit." "You did more than that," Drake said quietly. "You exposed a system that allowed it to happen. That's what will create real change." They arrived at the Capitol building to find it surrounded by media trucks and protesters, some supporting Naomi, others angrily demanding that anyone involved in the conspiracy face maximum penalties. Capitol Police escorted them through a side entrance, away from the cameras and crowds. The Senate Armed Services Committee chamber was packed when they arrived. Senators sat in their raised seats, their faces grave. Gallery seating was full of journalists, military officials, and families of soldiers who had died in operations now understood to have been compromised by the illegal arms sales. Senator Margaret Rhodes, the committee chair, called the session to order with 3 sharp strikes of her gavel. This emergency session is called to investigate allegations of illegal arms trafficking, conspiracy, and attempted murder within the United States military. Captain Naomi Caldwell, please approach the witness table. Naomi walked forward, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. She sat at the table, adjusted the microphone, and looked up at the senators who would decide what happened next. Captain Caldwell, Senator Rhodes began, you were declared killed in action 12 years ago, yet here you sit before us, very much alive. Please, in your own words, tell us what happened. Naomi took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for 12 years. Senator, in September 2013, I was a captain in the United States Army flying Apache helicopters in Afghanistan. I was assigned to escort a supply convoy through a region near the Pakistan border. During that mission, I witnessed American military equipment, Javelin missiles, encrypted communications gear, and advanced weapon systems being transferred to individuals who were not American military personnel. She paused, letting that sink in. I documented the transfer using my Apache's targeting cameras and sensor suite. I reported what I'd seen through proper channels. 3 days later, I was assigned to a routine patrol in an area that was supposedly secure. During that patrol, my helicopter was hit by weapons fire. The chamber was absolutely silent. The official report says I was shot down by enemy forces, but the ballistics analysis, the one that was supposed to be destroyed but I managed to obtain, showed that the rounds came from an M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, an American weapon. Senator Rhodes leaned forward. Are you telling this committee that American military personnel attempted to murder you? Yes, Senator. I am saying that when I discovered evidence of illegal arms trafficking by senior military and civilian officials, those officials attempted to eliminate me. They failed. I survived, went into hiding, and spent 12 years gathering enough evidence to expose the entire conspiracy. She gestured toward the screens around the chamber, which were now displaying documents from the data dump. Everything you've received today, every document, every bank record, every video file is authentic and verifiable. This wasn't one bad actor or one isolated incident. It was a systematic operation that spanned over a decade, involved dozens of personnel, and resulted in American weapons being used to kill American soldiers. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Senator Rhodes struck her gavel repeatedly. Order! We will have order! She looked back at Naomi. Captain, these are extraordinary allegations. They implicate some of the highest-ranking officials in our military and government. Yes, Senator, they do. And every single allegation is backed by evidence that will stand up in any court. Naomi's voice was steady, strong. I didn't come back from the dead to make accusations. I came back to present facts. The question before this committee isn't whether these crimes happened. The evidence proves they did. The question is what you're going to do about it.
The hearing continued for 7 hours, with Naomi meticulously walking the committee through every piece of evidence, every transaction, every name connected to the conspiracy. Major Drake provided corroborating testimony about what she'd witnessed in the underground facility. Colonel Lawson testified about the inconsistencies he'd found in the official records. By midnight, when the committee finally recessed, the scope of the corruption was undeniable. Senator Rhodes addressed the chamber with barely contained fury. This committee will be issuing subpoenas to every individual named in Captain Caldwell's evidence. The Justice Department will have our full cooperation in prosecuting these cases. And I want to be clear, there will be no plea deals, no quiet retirements, no sweeping this under the rug. She looked directly at Naomi. Captain Caldwell, on behalf of the United States Senate, I want to apologize. You served your country with honor, exposed crimes at great personal risk, and were betrayed by the very institution you swore to protect. That betrayal is unforgivable. The next morning, Naomi woke in a secure hotel room with armed guards outside her door. Not to keep her in, but to keep threats out. The Justice Department was taking no chances with their star witness. She turned on the television to find herself on every channel. The Washington Post headline read, "Ghost Pilot Exposes Decade of Military Corruption." The New York Times went with, "Army Captain's Return from the Dead Triggers Biggest Military Scandal in Decades."
Her phone, a new one provided by the FBI, buzzed with a text from Major Drake. "Turn on C-SPAN. You need to see this." Naomi switched channels to find a press conference at the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense stood at a podium, his face grave. Last night, based on evidence provided by Captain Naomi Caldwell, the Department of Defense initiated what will be the most comprehensive internal investigation in our history. We have already identified over 60 current and former personnel who will face criminal charges ranging from fraud to treason. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Captain Caldwell exhibited extraordinary courage, both in her original service and in her determination to expose corruption despite knowing it could cost her life. Effective immediately, she is being reinstated to active duty with full back pay for the 12 years she spent in forced exile. The reporters erupted with questions, but the secretary raised his hand. Additionally, Captain Caldwell is being promoted to the rank of Major and will be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for her actions. Her previous decorations, which were stripped when she was declared KIA, are being restored. The Army she served deserves to operate with integrity, and she has helped us take a major step toward that goal. Naomi felt tears streaming down her face. She'd spent 12 years believing she'd been erased from the institution she loved. Now they were welcoming her back, acknowledging her sacrifice, validating everything she'd fought for. Over the following weeks, the fallout continued to spread like ripples from a stone thrown into still water.
General Whitmore was indicted on 18 counts, including conspiracy, arms trafficking, and attempted murder. She would eventually be sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. 3 senators resigned and were subsequently arrested. 2 would be convicted and serve time. The 3rd would cooperate with investigators and receive a reduced sentence. 17 defense contractors saw their security clearances revoked and their contracts canceled. 5 would face criminal prosecution. The CIA officer who had coordinated logistics for the arms transfers was found dead in his home, officially ruled a suicide, though many suspected otherwise. Over 40 military personnel of various ranks faced court-martial. Some were convicted, others took plea deals in exchange for testimony against higher-ranking conspirators. But beyond the arrests and trials, something more fundamental was changing. The scandal forced a complete review of how classified military operations were overseen. New protocols were established to prevent single points of failure in accountability. Whistleblower protections were strengthened, and most importantly, a culture that had tolerated corruption in the name of operational security began to shift toward transparency and integrity. Naomi, now Major Caldwell, was assigned to a newly created position within the Inspector General's office, Special Investigator for Operational Integrity. Her job was to review classified operations for signs of corruption and ensure that what happened to her never happened to anyone else. 6 months after her return, she stood at Arlington National Cemetery in front of a memorial wall listing soldiers killed in action. Among the names were men and women who had died from weapons that should never have been in enemy hands. She placed her hand on the cold marble and whispered, "I kept my promise. The people who did this are paying for it." Behind her, Major Drake approached quietly. In the months since the testimony, they'd become close friends, bound by the extraordinary circumstances they'd shared. "The families are here," Drake said softly. "They want to thank you." Naomi turned to see a group of people, parents, spouses, children, who had lost loved ones in operations compromised by the illegal arms sales. They'd been invited to a private ceremony acknowledging their losses and the truth behind them. An older woman stepped forward, her eyes red but determined. "Major Caldwell, my son died in Afghanistan in 2011. We were told it was enemy fire. Now we know the missiles that killed him were American weapons that were sold illegally. I wanted to tell you." Her voice broke, but she continued. "I wanted to tell you that what you did, exposing this, it doesn't bring him back, but it means his death wasn't meaningless. It means something changed because of it." Naomi embraced her and for the first time in 12 years allowed herself to fully feel the weight of what had happened, not just to her, but to all the people affected by the conspiracy she'd exposed. Later that evening, she returned to Fort Bragg, where Apache AH-7743 sat in a hangar, restored and maintained, but no longer in active service.
The helicopter had been retired with honors and would eventually be placed in a museum as a testament to the events that had changed military oversight forever. Naomi ran her hand along the hull one last time. "Thank you, old friend. We did it together." Colonel Lawson, who had been promoted to general for his role in supporting the investigation, approached with a smile. "Major Caldwell, I have new orders for you. You are being assigned to train the next generation of Apache pilots. Teach them not just how to fly, but why integrity matters more than rank or orders." Naomi saluted. "Yes, sir. I'd be honored." As she walked out of the hangar into the North Carolina sunset, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. 12 years of hiding, of gathering evidence, of living as a ghost. All leading to this moment. Not of vengeance, but of restoration. She pulled out her phone and called her family for the first time in 12 years. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Mom, it's me. I'm coming home."
1 year after Naomi Caldwell returned from the dead, the military landscape had fundamentally transformed. The scandal she exposed, now known simply as Operation Phantom Trade in official reports, had become a case study taught at West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy. Future officers learned about it not as a cautionary tale of individual corruption, but as a systemic failure that required institutional courage to correct. In a courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia, General Evelyn Whitmore stood before a military judge for sentencing. The trial had lasted 3 months, with prosecutors presenting overwhelming evidence of her role in the conspiracy. She'd been found guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern woman with 30 years on the bench, looked down at Whitmore without sympathy. "General Whitmore, you held a position of sacred trust. Soldiers placed their lives in your hands, believing you would protect them. Instead, you profited from their deaths. You attempted to murder a fellow officer who discovered your crimes. You betrayed every principle the uniform represents." The judge paused, letting the words sink in. "This court sentences you to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. You will be stripped of your rank, your pension, and all military honors. You are dismissed from service in disgrace." Whitmore's face remained impassive, but those watching saw her hands tremble as military police led her away. She would spend the rest of her life in prison, her name synonymous with betrayal. Similar scenes played out in courtrooms across the country as conspirators faced justice. Senator Douglas Morrison received 28 years for his role in facilitating arms transfers. Defense contractor Martin Burke was sentenced to 40 years in order to forfeit $300 million in illegal profits. CIA officer Thomas Reynolds, who had coordinated logistics, had died before trial, his suicide note confessing to crimes that implicated a dozen others. But the real victory wasn't in the prison sentences. It was in the changes those sentences prompted. Congress passed the Military Accountability and Transparency Act, creating independent oversight boards with power to investigate classified operations without requiring permission from those being investigated. The Pentagon established the Office of Operational Integrity, headed by a civilian director who reported directly to the Secretary of Defense and congressional oversight committees. Whistleblower protections were strengthened dramatically, with new channels for reporting misconduct that bypassed normal chains of command. And, perhaps most importantly, a culture shift began within the military itself. Junior officers saw that speaking truth to power wouldn't automatically end careers. Sometimes it saved them. At Fort Rucker, Alabama, Major Naomi Caldwell stood before a class of 40 Apache pilot candidates. These young officers represented the future of Army aviation, and she took her responsibility to train them seriously. But today's lesson wasn't about flying. "Who can tell me," she asked the class, "what your most important duty is as an Army officer?" Hand shot up. "To follow orders, ma'am," one eager lieutenant called out. Naomi shook her head. "Try again." "To complete the mission," another offered. Close, but no. She walked to the front of the classroom and wrote on the board, "To uphold the Constitution. Your oath isn't to your commanding officer.
It's not to the president or the Secretary of Defense or even to the flag. It's to the Constitution of the United States. That means when you see something wrong, even if your superiors are the ones doing it, you have a duty to report it.
A young warrant officer in the back raised his hand hesitantly. Ma'am, with respect, that's a great ideal, but in the real world, reporting your superiors can end your career. Naomi smiled. Warrant officer, what's my name? Major Naomi Caldwell, ma'am. And what am I famous for? The young man shifted uncomfortably. For exposing a corruption scandal after being declared dead, ma'am? That's right. And did exposing that corruption end my career? Understanding dawned on the student's face. No, ma'am. It defined it. Exactly. I won't lie to you. Doing the right thing is often the hardest thing. But I'm standing here today because I chose integrity over convenience. So did Colonel Lawson, now General Lawson, who supported me when it would have been easier to follow questionable orders. So did Major Drake, who testified alongside me when she could have stayed silent. Naomi gestured to the back of the classroom where Major Simone Drake stood, now assigned as an instructor alongside her. The military is only as strong as the integrity of its officers. You're going to fly some of the most advanced weapon systems in the world. People will trust you with million-dollar aircraft and with their lives. That trust is sacred. Never, ever betray it for convenience, career advancement, or because someone with more rank tells you to. The class was silent, absorbing the weight of her words. Now, Naomi continued with a slight smile, let's talk about actual flying. Who can explain the proper startup sequence for an Apache? After class, a young captain approached Naomi nervously. Major Caldwell, I wanted to thank you. My brother was killed in Afghanistan in 2012. We were told it was enemy fire, but after your testimony, we learned he died from an American missile that had been sold illegally. Your investigation helped our family finally understand what really happened. Naomi placed a hand on the captain's shoulder. I'm sorry for your loss. Your brother deserved better. He did, ma'am, but because of you, other families won't have to go through what we did. That means everything. That evening, Naomi returned to her quarters on base and found an unexpected visitor waiting, Lieutenant Aaron Briggs, who had first spotted her at Fort Bragg a year ago. He'd been promoted and reassigned to Fort Rucker. Sir, he said with a grin, I wanted to thank you for making my career. Turns out being the guy who spotted a ghost pilot is great for promotion boards. Naomi laughed. Lieutenant, you earned that promotion by doing your job well. But you're welcome. Briggs grew more serious. Actually, ma'am, I wanted to ask for advice. I'm being considered for a position in military intelligence. After everything that happened, I want to make sure I'm ready for the ethical challenges that come with classified work. They talked for over an hour about integrity, oversight, and the responsibilities that came with security clearances. It was conversations like these, Naomi realized, that would ensure the sacrifice of the past year created lasting change. Later, she video called her mother, something that had become a nightly ritual. Seeing her family again after 12 years had been overwhelming. Tears, explanations, reconciliations. Her mother had aged, her father had passed away thinking his daughter was dead, but they were rebuilding their relationship day by day. How was class today? Her mother asked. Good, Mom. Really good. These kids are going to be excellent pilots. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, not just for exposing the corruption, but for coming back from it, for choosing to serve again instead of walking away bitter. I never wanted to walk away, Mom. I just wanted the military to be what it's supposed to be, an institution worthy of the sacrifices people make for it.
2 years after her resurrection, Major Naomi Caldwell stood on a stage at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., surrounded by investigative journalists, military reformers, and families of soldiers who had been affected by the conspiracy she'd exposed. She'd been invited to speak at a conference on governmental accountability, but she'd insisted on one condition, that the families shared the stage with her.
When people tell the story of Operation Phantom Trade, Naomi began, addressing the packed auditorium, they often focus on the dramatic moments: the dead pilot returning, the secret facility, the congressional testimony. But those moments were just punctuation marks in a much longer story. She gestured to the people standing beside her. The real story belongs to these families. Parents who buried children killed by American weapons, sold for profit. Spouses who raised families alone because corruption was more important than loyalty. Children who grew up without mothers and fathers because powerful people valued money over honor. A man named Robert Chen, whose son had been killed in 2011, stepped forward to speak. "My son died believing he was protecting America. When we learned the truth, that he was killed by weapons his own country sold illegally, it destroyed us." But Major Caldwell didn't just expose the conspiracy. She gave us answers. She gave us justice. She gave us the truth. And in doing that, she gave us the ability to heal. The audience applauded, but Naomi raised her hand for quiet. Healing is important, but it's not enough. We need to ensure this never happens again, and that requires eternal vigilance. She pulled up a presentation showing the reforms implemented since the scandal. The Military Accountability and Transparency Act has created real oversight. In the past 2 years, 17 potential corruption cases have been identified and stopped before they could grow into major conspiracies. Whistleblowers are coming forward with confidence that their careers won't be destroyed for doing the right thing. Major Drake, sitting in the front row, smiled with pride. She'd become one of the military's most vocal advocates for transparency, using her experience to push for continued reforms. But legislation and oversight boards aren't enough, Naomi continued. What really prevents corruption is culture. It's officers at every level understanding that their oath to the Constitution supersedes their loyalty to individual commanders. It's junior enlisted soldiers knowing they can report wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. It's all of us, military and civilian, refusing to accept that national security requires us to tolerate criminal behavior. She paused, her voice becoming more personal. 12 years ago, I reported seeing American weapons being transferred to people who shouldn't have them. I thought I was doing my duty. Instead, I was targeted for assassination, declared dead, and forced to spend over a decade gathering evidence while living in hiding. The room was absolutely silent. I don't regret my choice. I'd make it again, but I shouldn't have had to make it. No one should have to choose between their integrity and their life. That's why these reforms matter. That's why your continued attention matters. That's why we can never become complacent. After the speech, Naomi was approached by a young woman in Army uniform, a second lieutenant fresh out of West Point. "Major Caldwell, I just wanted you to know that your story was part of what convinced me to join the Army. Not in spite of what happened to you, but because of how you handled it. You proved the system can be fixed if people are willing to fight for it."
Naomi felt a surge of hope. This was what it had all been for. Not revenge, not vindication, but creating a better future for the next generation of soldiers. "Lieutenant, what's your branch?" "Aviation, ma'am. I'm heading to Fort Rucker next month for flight school. I want to fly Apaches." Naomi smiled. "Then I'll see you in my classroom. And I promise you, we'll make sure you're ready not just to fly, but to lead with integrity." That evening, Naomi returned to Fort Rucker and made her way to the museum, where Apache AH-7743 was now permanently displayed. The helicopter sat in a place of honor, surrounded by plaques explaining its role in exposing one of the largest military corruption scandals in American history. She stood before her old aircraft, remembering the missions they'd flown together, the combat they survived, and the final journey that had changed everything. A museum curator approached quietly. "Major Caldwell, we get visitors every day who want to see this helicopter. Veterans who served with you, young pilots who want to understand what happened, families seeking closure. This aircraft has become more than a machine. It's a symbol." "A symbol of what?" Naomi asked. "Of the idea that one person, doing the right thing at great personal cost, can change the world. Of the principle that duty and honor aren't just words, they're choices we make every day. Of the truth
that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. Naomi placed her hand on the Apache's hull one last time, feeling the cool metal beneath her palm. Thank you, old friend. We changed the world together. She walked out of the museum into the Alabama evening, where Major Drake was waiting. Ready for that drink you've been promising me? Drake asked with a smile. Absolutely. I think we've earned it. As they walked toward the officers' club, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 12 years of being dead, one dramatic return, 2 years of rebuilding, countless lives affected, systems changed, justice served. It hadn't been easy, it hadn't been safe, but it had been right. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The woman who had been declared KIA 12 years ago was now living a life dedicated to ensuring that truth, integrity, and accountability remained at the heart of military service. She'd been given a second chance, not just at life, but at making a difference. Around the country, in courtrooms and classrooms, in congressional hearings and military briefings, the impact of her choice continued to ripple outward. Policies were being rewritten. Oversight was being strengthened. A new generation of officers was being trained with her story as a foundational lesson in ethical leadership. General Lawson had once told her that she'd changed military culture forever. Standing here now, watching young pilots train with the knowledge that integrity mattered more than rank, she believed him. The ghost had returned. The truth had been told. Justice had been served. And the military she loved was becoming worthy of the sacrifices people made for it. As the sun set over Fort Rucker, Major Naomi Caldwell smiled. She'd spent 12 years dead, but she'd never felt more alive. The fight had been worth it. Every sacrifice, every moment of fear, every year of isolation, it had all led to this moment of hope and change. She was home. Finally, truly home. And she was ready for whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.